All right, good evening, everyone. This is our final program for Faith and Freedom, which is a program series that started with a conversation about Christianity and abolition. Then we had our Juneteenth symposium featuring Dr. Cody Roberts. And then tonight we have Kenneth Hoffman talking about the Southern Jewish experience. Our next program is the start of our Fashion Through the Ages series, which is going to have, we're going to start on August 20th with our fashion exhibit opening. We're going to have a pretty sizable fashion exhibit from the Shadows collection. It is free for members. It is time to renew your membership. So if you haven't yet, we can take care of that tonight, or you can send back in your letter that you gotten. Or if you're not a member, you're welcome to join tonight. You'll get a discount code that discounts the ticket to $0 whenever you register for the event on August 20th. Okay. So tonight is Kenneth Hoffman, degrees from Tulane, from New Orleans. He is the executive director at the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience, and my former boss at World War II Museum. So, Kenneth.
All right. Good. Let's see. Let's turn this on. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. I'm thrilled to be in New Iberia to talk to y'all about the museum where I work in New Orleans. Has anybody ever been to, raise your hand if you've been to New Orleans? Okay, yeah, all right. So you've heard of that. Okay, I don't need to go into that. Anybody here been to the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience? Oh, a few people. Wonderful. That's great. Well, tonight I'm going to tell you a little bit about the museum. And within the story of the museum comes through some of the themes, the faith and freedom themes of this series that Shadows is putting on. And I'm so pleased that I got an invitation to come here and make this presentation. We're going to start off, if Adam is still around, I don't know if he's still in here, but when I was at the World War II Museum, we would do these World War II pub quizzes all the time, and they were a lot of fun. So we're going to do a quick little pub quiz, some questions. We'll see how y'all do. Question number 1 is, which city had the first synagogue outside of the original 13 colonies? Is it Savannah, Mobile, or New Orleans? Outside of the original 13 colonies, Savannah, Georgia, that's one of the original 13 colonies. So now you're down to 2. It is New Orleans. Today, what is today Toro Synagogue was started in 1828, and it was, like I said, the first synagogue outside of the original 13 colonies. Question number 2, which sweet treats trace their kosher roots back to Savannah, Georgia? Who said that? You're right. It is Girl Scout cookies. In, what was it, 1900 something or other, Juliette Gordon Low started the Girl Scouts, and she asked 4 of her friends to be den mothers or pack leaders, or I'm not sure what that's called. 3 Girl Scout leaders. 3 of those 4 women were Jewish friends of hers in Savannah. Later, when they started selling cookies to raise money, they went to the best bakery in town, Gottlieb's. Gottlieb's Bakery is a kosher bakery, and ever since then, Girl Scout cookies are kosher, even today. So if you've had a Thin Mint or a Tag-Along or any of those, then you have had a Southern Jewish experience. And the last question, which African-American musician was befriended by a Jewish family at age 7 and given his first instrument? All right, when it says Buddy Bolden there, I didn't know there were going to be subtitles, but yes, Louis Armstrong, the Karnofsky family, a family of Lithuanian Jewish immigrants, befriended him. They didn't adopt him. There's a lot of myth and misconception around this story that they adopted him, that he spoke fluent Yiddish because he spent time with them. That's not true. But he did ride on the back of their junk wagon as they were going through town, and he would toot on a little, tin horn to get people's attention. And one day in a pawn shop window, he saw an old busted up cornet and he wanted to buy it. And so the Karnofskys were going to buy it for him, but he said, no, don't buy it for me, just lend me the money. So they lent him $5 for it. And for the rest of Louis Armstrong's life, he did wear a Jewish star necklace in honor of the friendship and love and support that the Karnofskys gave him. So if you've ever listened to any Louis Armstrong, you've had a Southern Jewish experience. All right, so first of all, just what is the South? What part of the country is the South? A lot of people have their own conceptions. For us, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and of course, Louisiana. And here's where our museum is. Now, a lot of people will say, well, how come you don't include Missouri or Maryland? Maryland's south of the Mason-Dixon line, or why do you include Oklahoma? That's not the South. Whatever. What I tell them is, you start your own museum. These are the states that our museum covers. So that's just the way it is. Here is the museum. It is in downtown New Orleans. I'm going to give you a sense of where it is in just a minute. We opened about 5 years ago. We don't have the whole building. We share the building with other tenants. But this is the part of the museum that opened in May of 21. And then last year, we opened up the Chapman Family Research Center, which is a place where people can come and explore things in our collection that aren't on display. They can do some of their genealogy. And it's really interesting. We have people that come into the museum and they say, I'm not Jewish, but I spit in one of those tubes and I sent it off to the place and they did my DNA and it came back and I'm like, I'm 14% Ashkenazi Jewish or something like that. I never knew that. Now I want to know more. So we're helping people discover their Southern Jewish roots. And up on the roof, I took this picture. If you're familiar with downtown New Orleans, then this is what you see from our roof. You see a lot of the World War II Museum where Adam and I used to work. And you see other museums like the Contemporary Arts Center and the Ogden Museum of Southern Art. And then way over to the right, to y'all's right, is where Temple Sinai used to be. The original Temple Sinai, which is now further up St. Charles Avenue, but it was what is now the parking lot of the old Katz and Bestoff building because it was so old that they had to tear it down. The building we're in is old. It's historic. It's built in 1916. Lots of bricks, lots of exposed beams, which means, of course, lots of dust. But we have people to take care of that. Me. And the new owners of the building did a great job of renovating it and renovating our part of it so we could move a museum in. This is sort of what it looked like before. And then, now we have converted it into a professional, wonderful, world-class museum. Our exhibits were designed or fabricated by the same people that did the exhibits at the World War II Museum down the street. I had worked with them for many years, so I worked with them again when I moved over to open up MSJE. So I'm going to go through what you would see in the exhibits kind of quickly, and I'll stop every once in a while and tell a story. If anyone has questions along the way, just raise your hand or shout it out, and we can have a conversation. We start off, first of all, the exhibits, we have about 9,000 square feet of space, so it's not huge. And we're talking about 300 plus years of history in 13 states. So it's not encyclopedic. But that's what a museum is. It's curated to tell a larger story with some specific examples. So we start off with a lovely timeline. And I want to point out that the timeline puts people in the the milieu, the American experience, the Southern experience. So you see where it says 1654? That's when a ship of Portuguese Jews comes from Brazil up to New Amsterdam. You guys know what New Amsterdam is called now? New York, exactly. But look down there, 1585, there was a Jewish presence in the Virginia colony. So, like I tell people when I give a tour, it's not a contest, but we were first down in the South. And there are other things that were first by Jews in the South. So we have maps. You can't go to a museum without maps. They're coming to get me. We talk about the different waves of immigration. First, Sephardic Jews. These are Jews who originated on the Iberian Peninsula. Iberia. Old Iberia. New Iberia. Interesting. Anyway, when in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and Spain kicked out every Jew, and Muslim too. They don't teach you that part, but the Great Expulsion in 1492, the Jews of the Iberian Peninsula had to leave. Many went to London or to Amsterdam, to Morocco, to Greece, to Turkey. Those are Sephardic Jews. They were the first to come over to the New World, mostly to possessions of the countries they were in, the islands. And then from there, they migrate north to cities like New Orleans, Savannah, Charleston, Mobile, Norfolk, Richmond. It's not on the coast, but these are cities that had early colonial ties to the Caribbean. Later, after 1881, when the Tsar is assassinated and Jews are blamed, a lot of anti-Semitism in the Russian Empire, that's when we start getting Ashkenazi Jews. These are Eastern European Jews who start to come over. And this is when you think of the Ellis Island story of, all the millions of people, not just Jews, but Italians and Irish coming through Ellis Island. That's the Ashkenazi Jewish story. And then we're covered up here, but it says Alsatian Jews down there because in this part of Louisiana in particular, there was a large influx of Jews from Alsace and Lorraine, which sometimes was German and sometimes was French, depending on, who was winning which war at which time. Those Jews came to Louisiana in large part because there were a lot of French-speaking people here, especially around the 1830s, 1840s, and 1850s. We talk about then people moving into the interior as the South, as swamps were drained, as railroads were built, as towns sprung up. Jews followed. There was a reason to immigrate to the South. Jews, for the most part, in Europe, in most parts of Europe, hadn't been allowed to own land for centuries. They had been denied entry to the guilds, the various, basically unions. So they had honed their own merchant skills. And down in the South, it is an agricultural region, and the farmers need merchants, and the merchants need customers. So there was a nice relationship kind of built in. That relationship wasn't always, smooth, but that's the reason that Jews came south. The picture you see here is from the Ellis Island of the South. Does anybody know what town or what city was known as the Ellis Island of the South? Galveston. Galveston, Texas. Between 1907 and 1914, 10,000 Jews were brought through Galveston. This was intentional by Jews in New York City who saw the overcrowding of the Lower East Side and said, we need to divert Jews. So they sent Jews down through Galveston. So today, Jewish families in Texas and in Oklahoma and in Kansas and Missouri and further out west can trace their roots oftentimes back to an immigrant family that came through Galveston. You can't have a story about the South without talking about race. Race is the blanket that covers Southern history, covers American history. And we don't shy away from talking about how Jews navigated the racial landscape of the South. Jews owned slaves in the South. Jews were slave dealers in the South. And we talk about that. But we're careful to use academic history to tell the story. Jews owned slaves in about the same percentage as non-Jewish white Southerners. Jews tended to live in towns, not on plantations. So if they did own an enslaved person, it was usually be one or two, not that that excuses the experience, but that's the case there. Here are some newspaper examples of Jewish slave owners or runaway ads, and you see those as you look around the room too and look at the history of Shadows-on-the-Teche. This was, we've got Thibodaux, Atlanta, Charleston, and this one is actually Baton Rouge. Jews fought for the Confederacy. This was their home. They had been accepted here. When they stepped off the boat in the South, they were white. They weren't black. And so automatically, they were not on the lowest rung of the racial or socioeconomic ladder, and they took advantage of that, as did all white Southerners to some extent or another, whether they owned slaves or not. They lived in an environment of white supremacy. This is Judah P. Benjamin. He was a senator from Louisiana. When Louisiana seceded, he gave a speech on the floor of the Senate. It's a very famous speech about how the North will not, conquer the South. The South has the right to its own determination. So he joins the Confederate, Jefferson Davis's Confederate cabinet, first as Attorney General, then as Secretary of War, and finally as Secretary of State. It's really after the Civil War that the Jewish population in the South starts to grow. The banking system in the South had been decimated, but planters still needed to plant. So how do planters get their seed and supply? They can go to the merchant, the dry goods merchant, Mr. Cohen or Mr. Bernheimer. First, these Jews may have started as peddlers, going from town or going from farm to farm with pots and pans and bolts of cloth, toys for the kids, maybe some books. And the farmers were pleased to see him coming down the road. There wasn't Walmart then. There wasn't Amazon delivery then. And this was it. And then if he does well with his route and he raises some money, he can open up a little store, maybe. This is, like at Seligman's up in, or this cash register is from Galante's in Lake Providence, Louisiana. Once you become financially set, comfortable enough, then you start to become more involved civically and communally with your community. This artifact, which is on display in the museum, is one of my favorite artifacts. When I was at Tulane getting my master's in history, I wrote about the Jews of Port Gibson, Mississippi. And I found this in the archives there of the city, not the congregation. There is no congregation there anymore. This is in 1898. The Jews of Port Gibson are trying to raise money to build a synagogue. It says that they've been meeting in the Masonic Hall. It's very tight, cramped. But then they say, our fellow Christian citizens often ask us why the Israelites have no church. For our children's sake, we need, and to gain the proper respect, we need to have a temple. And they've written this, it's a typed fundraising letter, but they've written it at the top there. They're writing to Bethel Congregation, Detroit, Michigan. So I can't imagine how many of these letters they sent out to different congregations around the country. But what's fascinating about this artifact is by becoming more Southern, they're becoming more Jewish. And by becoming more Jewish, they're becoming more Southern. And what I mean by that is they're saying our Christian neighbors aren't saying, don't be Jewish, come to our church. They're saying, why don't you have a church? We have a church. You should have a church. So if we want to be more accepted in this community, we need to have a synagogue. So to become more Southern, they're becoming more Jewish. And then by becoming more Jewish, they're becoming more Southern. It's just a very fascinating sociological dual identity opportunity for these Jews in Port Gibson. We have an entire gallery called The Foundations of Judaism. And this is for folks who don't know what Judaism is. What is the religion? What are the holidays? What is a Torah? This Torah is from Port Gibson, as a matter of fact. This Torah is from Laurel, Mississippi. Every small town had a Jewish presence of some kind. If they had at least 10 or so Jewish families, then they would have a congregation. If they had 25 or 30 Jewish families, they could probably then build a little synagogue. Maybe they didn't have a rabbi at that point. Maybe they had a lay leader, or they would have a student rabbi come from one of the seminaries to lead services. But we also have a very fun interactive kiosk where you can explore different Jewish rituals. And the best one of that is how much Yiddish do you know? There's a Yiddish quiz on there. And people who don't know Yiddish always say, I'm not going to take that quiz. I don't speak any Yiddish. And we say, take the quiz. You'll be surprised. There are so many words in our language, in English, that are borrowed from, do y'all know the word schlep? I'm going to have to schlep, I had to schlep the kids to ballet practice and to soccer practice. That's a Yiddish word. There's a lot of crossover from Yiddish, even before Seinfeld. We started way back in the 17th century. Now we're coming into the 20th century with another timeline, talking about how Jews were involved in things like World War II and the Civil Rights Movement, the suffragist movement before. And we have a Holocaust gallery, right? We're not a Holocaust museum, but you can't have a Jewish museum and not talk about the Holocaust. It's such a touchstone moment in Jewish history and in human history. But our Holocaust gallery doesn't talk about the camps or the rise of Hitler or Nazi ideology. What it talks about is how Southern Jews reacted to the Holocaust, how they wrote letters to their congressmen asking for visas for family that were still in Europe. This is before, right before the war. Once the war started, that was over. And then we talk about survivors of the Holocaust who made new lives for themselves in the South. Right now, we have an exhibit, a special exhibit called the New Americans Social Club of New Orleans. And it was a club of Holocaust survivors who banded together in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond because of their shared experiences during the Holocaust. Civil rights and activism is what that says. We have a civil rights exhibit. The civil rights history of Jews in the South is a nuanced history, as is all history. Jews in the South were generally more liberal and more progressive than their non-Jewish neighbors. Generally, there were white Jewish segregationists. There were Southern Jewish, young Southern Jewish people on the front lines of the civil rights movement, but not many. When you think about the Freedom Riders, the college students on the buses that came down during the Freedom Summer, came down to Mississippi to register African Americans to vote, those were kids from New York. When the Jewish community in Birmingham got wind that these buses were coming down, it was like, oh crap. Like this isn't going to be good for the Jews. These kids are coming down, these mostly Jewish kids are coming down, and they're rabble-rousing and they're stirring the pot. And we Jews have been accepted by our Southern community because, in large part, we have fit in. We've fit in with the social order in a lot of ways. And so there was a lot of fear, and things happened. Like the temple in Atlanta is dynamited. If you've seen Driving Miss Daisy, this was one of the central plot points in Driving Miss Daisy. The temple in Jackson in 1967. That's Perry Nussbaum, Rabbi Perry Nussbaum. He spoke from the pulpit often in support of civil rights. He would drive from Jackson up to Parchman Farm to the state pen to minister to Jewish students who had been arrested, for trying to register African Americans to vote. So he was very vocal. His synagogue was dynamited, and a month later, his home was dynamited when he and his wife were in it. Neither was injured by that. But and then in Meridian the next year at Temple B'nai Israel, the synagogue there was bombed after the rabbi and a fellow named Marty Davidson were very active in the interracial community group up there. And we have on display letters from students in the 4th grade at St. Patrick's Church in Meridian that they wrote to the rabbi. Said things like, "Dear Reverend Milton Schlager, I'm so sorry that your temple was bombed last night. I believe that everybody is our brother. I hope that this person who did it," we have a whole stack of these letters from these 4th graders in 1968. And earlier this year, again at B'nai Israel in Jackson, there was an arson. Someone broke in, spread gasoline all around, and lit a fire. And that building is, unusable and needs to be renovated. And we have several artifacts from that arson. So yes, we talk about things from 300 years ago, but it's the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience, not the Museum of Southern Jewish History, because things continue. Now, I am going to go back because I wanted to show you there are 2 terms that Jewish people take to heart, and they're kind of covered up, but one is tzedakah, and this is what's known as a tzedakah box. It's basically like a piggy bank. It has a slot, pig, not kosher, but anyway. So tzedakah, a lot of people, even Jewish people, think tzedakah means charity, because the tzedakah box, you would put money in because it goes to charity. And in this case, there's this very elegant and simple sign that says social justice. But tzedakah actually means righteousness. And it's a commandment. In the Jewish world, it's one of the commandments that you are to be a righteous person, and by being righteous, you're helping to repair the world, which is tikkun olam. These are Hebrew words. Tikkun olam means repairing the world. And does anybody know who either of these 2 gentlemen are? Booker T. Washington, Julius Rosenwald. Julius Rosenwald was one of the founders of Sears, and he was a philanthropist, and he worked very closely with Booker T. Washington to help build about 5,000 schools across the South for African American children. And Donaldsonville, which isn't too far from here, has one of these schools. It was actually in convent at one point, but they moved the building to Donaldsonville to the African American River Road Museum. And you can go and get a tour of that and learn all about Julius Rosenwald and his partnership with Booker T. Washington. You have 3 here? Are they in? Are they in like a shape, or are they all dilapidated?
We have documentation. Before we couldn't find the records, but we have documentation by working with this group.
Awesome.
In Chicago, and they're gifting us. We don't even have to raise the money to start. So it's about the relationship between the Jewish community as represented by Julius Rosenwald.
Excellent.
And Professor Washington.
Excellent. Wonderful. Let me go back. In 1949, Dr. Ralph Bunche received the Nobel Prize for mediating the treaty that ended the war between the new state of Israel and their Arab neighbors. And he was making a tour around the country. He wanted to come to New Orleans to give a speech, but he and his group insisted that the meeting be integrated. And they tried to go to the municipal auditorium, and the municipal auditorium said, no, we can't have an integrated audience. This is 1949. This isn't that long ago. So they went to Tulane, and my alma mater, and they asked if they could use, I don't know, I'm not sure if they wanted to use McAllister Auditorium or where, but Tulane said, no, you can't do that. So they went to Temple Sinai, and they asked Rabbi Julian Feibelman if they could use Temple Sinai, and he went to the board of directors, the board of the synagogue, and he asked, and they said, yes, you can have your speech here, and they did. And it was the first large gathering, integrated gathering in New Orleans since Reconstruction. So something to be proud of. Side story, not everyone at Temple Sinai was in favor, because when you get a group of Jews together, you can never get everyone to agree. All right. We're getting close to the end of the exhibit here. We do have some fun things. People who maybe you didn't know were Jewish. I don't know if, who remembers Jack Crystal? Anybody here a Mississippi State fan? No, Mississippi State Bulldogs. Anyway, never mind. Kinky Friedman, Tony Randall. You guys know Tony Randall from The Odd Couple, right? Born in Tulsa, Jewish. Brent Spiner, Lieutenant Commander Data on Star Trek The Next Generation. Born and raised, bar mitzvahed in Houston, Texas. Goldberg, the wrestler, also from Oklahoma. Dinah Shore. See the what was it? See the USA in your Chevrolet, right? Jewish from Kentucky. Anyway, toward the end of the exhibit, you can take a deeper dive at these kiosks. You can start to search through different states and then even down into different cities. So on our Louisiana kiosk, these are the different cities you can explore and read. So basically an encyclopedia entry of that city. Here's New Iberia. You guys recognize it? Yeah. This is 1907. I think this is 1907. And if I make this a little bigger, you see Kling Brothers. I don't know if anybody remembers. No one here is old enough to remember the Kling Brothers store, but that's one of the Jewish stores that was here. And then, of course, throughout New Iberia's history, at least since the latter part of the 19th century, Jews have been here. Here is the dedication of the little church around the corner, Gates Prayer, and this was 1903, right, Stephen? Where's Stephen? 1903, and the city is very proud of it and puts an article in the paper, and then over here, this is later in 1961. They're talking about a Hanukkah a Hanukkah pageant that the temple put on, and maybe y'all, here's some Lahaski names, and you recognize any other names there, Stephen? Yeah, yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Yeah, and there we go. That's what I was talking about, Stephen, earlier. I don't know if anybody remembers when the Temple Sisterhood would do a corned beef sandwich sale, but this is the Lafayette newspaper with so even outside of the city, people knew about this corned beef sandwich sale that the Temple Sisterhood would do, and it was very popular for many years. And finally, the last part of our exhibit plays off of one of our artifacts, this quilt. It's actually quite large. This quilt is made by the Jewish Ladies Sewing Circle of Canton, Mississippi in 1885. In 1885, there was a crazy quilt craze going on around the world. It started in Victorian England. So what's interesting about this quilt, two things. One, it shows that the ladies of Canton, Mississippi were hip to the beat. They knew what was going on. They knew what was popular going on around the world. This wasn't some backwater. But what's even more interesting is the metaphor that a quilt like this gives us. They made this quilt to raise money for the synagogue, to raffle off, to raise money for the synagogue, a very common thing to do for churches and such. And the metaphor is that it's people coming together and giving of their time and their creativity and their talent to create something that then helps the community, the larger community. And that's really that's the universal lesson of the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. Yes, it is about a very small slice of the population, but Jews came, they started stores, they became professionals, they ran for city council or for school board, they became civically involved, they became philanthropic, and they helped their communities. And that is that kind of universal lesson that everyone's identity can be part of the larger quilt. So at the end of our exhibit, you sit down at a table and you sew your own quilt square. You choose the different fabrics you want, and the fabrics have things on them, and you choose patches to put on them, like I'm going to put the patch of a bicycle because I like to bicycle, or I'm going to put a patch of a Jewish star or a cross because that represents me. And you can also write on your square with your finger. And when you're finished making your square, you push a button and it jumps into the center and gets sewn with everyone else who is doing this throughout the day. So throughout the day, the quilt grows, it becomes more beautiful, it becomes crazier. But the idea is that everyone's unique identity can be part of the larger whole, and that makes us all safer and more prosperous. Now, why MSJE? Why? What is the need for MSJE? Anti-Semitism is on the rise in this country, particularly over the last 10 years for a variety of reasons. Since October 7th and the Hamas attack on Israel, there's been a huge rise in anti-Semitism across the country. And so besides telling people that their unique identity is welcome in their community, or should be, we want to make sure that people recognize that there are people with a unique identity in their community and that they should be welcomed. In 2025, there are more than 1,000 active hate groups being tracked across the United States. They're not all in the South, but as you can see, there are plenty in the South. And so this is a real concern, not just of Jews, but of anybody who cares about their community. So that is part of our mission, is to instill pride in the diversity of our community, of our Southern communities. And finally, it's covered up, But if you want to receive our newsletter, we have one called the Southern Schmooze. It comes out once a month. We email it to you. It talks about the programs we have that are coming up and a little bit of history and maybe an artifact of the month. We do a lot of programming. You're always welcome to come. It's almost always free. And if you can't come to New Orleans, most of our programs are Zoomed. So you can see them, you can sign up for them virtually as well. And I think that is my last slide. Shalom, make yourself at home is our tagline. It combines the Jewish, shalom means hello, means peace. The make yourself at home is the Southern hospitality that we all love. That's my story. If y'all have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Anybody have any questions or anything to offer? Yes.
I've heard somebody say the Jewish religion and the Jewish race are not necessarily the same thing. How do you feel about that?
Well, there is no Jewish race, so you're right. And race itself of late in academia is even being questioned as to what it means by race. You know, people from Norway and from Senegal are closer genetically than people from like France and Spain. Or I'm making that part up, but I mean, you know, there are questions about what race is. But you're right. Over time, even Jews themselves have called themselves a race. Judaism started as a nationality, as basically a country. That people didn't think of themselves as countries back in biblical times, but that's what Jews were. They were part of a specific, you know, you had Midianites here, you had Hittites there, you had Egyptians there, you had Jews there, or Israelites there. And over time, there are different, you'll see newspapers that say our Israelitish neighbors will be celebrating, you know, their Hanukkah celebration, or our fellow Hebrew citizens. So there's all kinds of different names that have been given to Jews, and a lot of calling Jews a race has often been used pejoratively, as in like that they are an inferior race. Today, not all Jews are genetically connected to the original Israelites. Over the thousands of years, there have been people who have become Jewish. There have been, you know, there's all kinds of genetic changes and things like that. Judaism is a religion. And even when Jews call themselves a race, Judaism is a religion, not a race. Yes?
I was thinking even the Lemba people of Africa, they DNA wise, they carry some of the Jewish ancestry.
Yeah.
Ethiopians.
Yep.
And so your point is well taken. This thing about race is really a false construct.
Yeah. Oh, we have a hand up.
We have a question from our online viewers.
Oh, is it my mother?
How easy was it for Jews to assimilate and feel accepted in small towns across South Louisiana where Catholicism is the prevalent faith?
Very, very good question. I'm reading a book right now that just came out. A fellow named Nicholas Lemon. He's from Donaldson. Well, his family's from Donaldsonville. He grew up in New Orleans. He now teaches journalism at Columbia University. He wrote a book called Returning, and it's all about his family growing up in Donaldsonville and then later in New Orleans, and how there was that dual identity of wanting to be accepted as Southern. Should we remain Jewish? How Jewish? Should we be openly Jewish? Do we need to hide our Jewishness? What are the advantages or disadvantages? But I will say that a lot of people come into the museum and they think that it's going to be a story of prejudice and anti-Semitism and violence, because the South is the land of racial violence and oppression, right? But the Jews fit into an interesting place oftentimes between black and white. First of all, they were considered white. So they were already, as I said earlier, like sort of, accepted for that legally. They were accepted in that respect. And they also provided services. Mr. Cohen down the street at the store. He's a great guy. If you read Southern literature, if you read To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee, I don't know if anyone's read that. There's a scene where the KKK comes up to a Jewish man's porch, and he comes out of his house and he's like, "I sold you those sheets. How dare you?" And they like slink away, So there's something about knowing somebody that makes it harder to hate them. So that it is possible, I'm not saying it's right, it is possible to not like a type of person, but he's okay. My neighbor, I know him. He's all right. I don't like those commie pinko Jews up in New York, trying to force the civil rights movement down our throats. But Mr. Solomon? Oh, he's a good guy. Mr. Solomon, I shop at his store, or he's been my kid's pediatrician forever. He's great because you know him. And so that's in a small town. It's also easier to know people. And Jews didn't live segregated. They didn't live in neighborhoods or ghettos because there weren't enough of them. So they lived with everyone else. So people got to know them. It's a long answer to your question, and I may not have even answered it, but that's the best I can do. Yes.
We here in New Iberia live on the Bayou Teche.
Mm.
We're about the halfway point for the 135-mile long Bayou Teche. Are there specific connections that come to mind between the Bayou Teche, communities of the Bayou Teche, and the Jewish community?
Well, Jews moved to this part of the country, or this part of the state, first of all, oftentimes because there was French speakers or German speakers in this area. Oftentimes they moved to this part of the area to factor cotton or sugarcane. And by factoring, that means that they were the middlemen. They weren't growing the sugarcane, they weren't growing the cotton, but when it would come to market, they would handle that and send it to market. So they played that business role. Now there were Jewish sugar people. Leon Gotcha was the richest man in Louisiana at the end of the 19th century because of his sugar empire. A little further west from here, you got a place called Kaplan, Louisiana. It was named after a man named Abram Kaplan, Jewish immigrant who, revolutionized the rice industry in Southwest Louisiana. So yeah, I mean, there's always a reason for people going places. Oftentimes it's business related, sometimes it's family related. Yeah. Yes.
Your presentation, Kenneth. You said something earlier which kind of led me to misunderstand. When you talked about that the members of the Jewish community were not always allies with the Africans who were enslaved or the blacks who were trying to get their civil rights recognized, acknowledged, right?
Right.
And I grew up and I read a lot about these periods. My take has been that there's always been I'm going to not say kinship, but an alliance between these two groups. And I guess it's because of the shared history of oppression. But whenever, as a little girl growing up and seeing all these images on television, with these people that were being, attacked, beaten, dogs sicked on them.
Right.
There were also whites who were in those groups. They had Jewish names. They were white.
Sure.
Even here in New Iberia, going further back into the 19th and early 20th century, with the small Jewish population and things that we had, the Dreyfus brothers. One, I think, was a rabbi of the temple. The other one, they were very, one was a legislator. And he was very much so an advocate for the freedmen and
Mhm.
getting the right to vote,
Sure.
you know, at great risk.
Right. So
I didn't
what
see
I
that.
would say, what I would say is that you're right, and I did mention that Jews in general were more liberal, more progressive than their non-Jewish white counterparts in general. I guess it's more of a what kind of action when you see pictures of Martin Luther King marching with a rabbi next to him. That's Abraham Joshua Heschel. He's not Southern. So you didn't see a Southern rabbi marching with him because the Southern rabbi had to be really careful because he didn't want his synagogue to be dynamited by the KKK. So a lot of Edith and Edgar Stern. Edith Stern was the daughter of Julius Rosenwald in New Orleans, worked tirelessly to make sure African Americans weren't wiped from voter rolls down at City Hall. But she wasn't marching in the street with a sign. She was doing things, she was using her privilege as where she could use it best because she was in a higher echelon of society, so to speak. So Jews are just like everyone else, only more so. Not monolithic. They're, so it's everything's a nuanced story, and in the South, everything is nuanced. So you are correct. It's just a matter of nuance. Yes, sir.
Are there any well-known Confederate generals that were Jewish?
No.
Kind of my mind, your mind?
No. The North had more Jewish soldiers than the South, but the South had more Jewish officers than the North. There were just fewer, the population was smaller in the South, obviously, if you've studied the Civil War. So there were Jews that reached high levels, but I don't think there were any Jewish Confederate generals. There's a wonderful book by a man named Robert Rosen called The Jewish Confederates, where he goes through and he talks about, in detail, about scores of Southern Jews who fought for the Confederacy, and have fascinating stories to tell. So,
Do you know if they died on the battlefield,
Mhm.
just like their other
yes.
patriots?
Yes. Up in Vicksburg, there is a Jewish cemetery inside the Confederate cemetery, inside the military cemetery. So in Natchez, Mississippi, when the USS Essex gunboat fired upon Natchez, there was one death. Only one death was caused. The people of Natchez had gone down under the hill, the part of to be safer, and a shell exploded and hit Rosalie Beekman in the head. And supposedly she said, "Father, I am killed," and then died. So, so Jews in the South suffered the consequences of the war, either as soldiers or as civilians, just like everyone else did. But they did participate. This was their home. You're not going to find Southern Jewish abolitionists. I would love to find one. I mean, I've really been looking. I've been looking hard, but I don't know how. I mean, first of all, how would any abolitionist in the South survive? In the years before the Civil War, not very well. And a Jewish one would, now maybe in the home, in private, they may have had those feelings, but certainly that would never have been expressed publicly.
Looking for
That
something
would-
that's not there.
That would be tarred. They would be tarred and feathered. They would be run out of town or killed.
How is the demographics, the Jewish population of the South? Is it flat? Is it going up or going down?
Today, there are more Jews in the South than ever before. They're just in different places. They're not in Port Gibson, Mississippi. They're not in Crowley. Are there any Jews in Crowley?
There used to be.
There, right. Right, there used to be. But they are in Atlanta, and they are in Houston and Dallas and Charlotte and Memphis and Miami and Jacksonville, the bigger cities where there's more opportunity. Again, most of these Jewish families, they didn't own land. One of the things that keeps you in smaller towns is if you own land. But if you are in the professions, then you are going to seek out, a place where you can be more successful. So, yeah, there are about 20% of American Jewry lives in the South. A majority of those are in Miami, Atlanta, Dallas, Houston. Those are the biggest cities.
It's on the rise? Slightly?
No, it's not on the rise. It is flat. It is flat. But demographics are always changing. People are moving south. Tulane University has the second highest Jewish student percentage of any university in the country. The second highest. Yeshiva University in New York, which is 100% Jewish because it's a Jewish school to teach kids to be Jewish. Tulane is about 35 to 37% Jewish.
Right now.
Right now.
Okay.
And there's a reason for that, and Tulane itself is trying to figure that out. I mean, they're trying to figure out historically. It has something to do with quotas. Early on, a lot of universities had quotas about Jewish students or even Jewish faculty, but Tulane had fewer quotas on Jewish students. So even back, my grandfather went to Tulane in the 1920s. There's a story to be written and researched and written there. I'm not going to do it, but someone at Tulane would definitely do it.
Does that include Newcomb as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my mom went to Newcomb, so and my kid's going to Tulane next year, so we're fourth generation, and on a museum salary. All right, I think that's it. I think our time is up. I really want to thank y'all. Out front, there are some rack cards about the museum, and on the back, there's like a discount if you want to come. So grab a rack card, and there's information about becoming a member. But you should sign up for our Southern Schmooze newsletter because we'd love to have you as part of the family. And thank you very much.